The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations. Welcome back to the Counsel House Podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff. Today we have an awesome guest, the Chief Government Affairs Officer at IQVIA, Andrew Barnhill. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So over recent years, how has the government affairs role at IQVIA changed from more reactive to proactive? And what do you think sparked that change?
Right. It's a great question because I think every business, particularly in a heavily regulated industry such as healthcare and the life sciences, has always had one eye towards government engagement. And that's certainly been the case for us. But one of the things that I've noticed since I've been on board is that we have increasingly worked to embed a government affairs thinking within the business itself. And so one of the things that I think where we've seen growth is sort of getting our business leaders from across the organization to understand the importance of that government interaction. And so the growth has been internal as much as it has been external.
And you've noted when we were speaking that the legal teams now see the government affairs team as not only more proactive, but very sort of a little more integrated. So how would you say it looks like within the practice there?
Right. So, it's about considering government affairs and policy as an important partner for each of your business and legal decisions that you have, not just an add-on. A lot of times what happens in businesses is they wait for that government problem, and then that's when the executive team will come to government affairs and say, can you help us fix this problem? But ultimately, what we have tried to communicate, and I think we've been successful at, is the importance of government affairs being involved in the earliest stages of business planning. So whether that is, determining where you're going to place a new facility, thinking about tax implications, or making decisions about, how you might pursue a particular contract. What does that look like for engaging with that particular government agency on those early stages? And I think it's led our business and others that involve government affairs in the early stages to being more successful at securing contracts, minimizing barriers, and engaging with government overall.
And so working at a company that's quite large, right? 86,000 employees. How do your resources shape your government affairs strategy?
Yeah, so obviously at a larger company, you have a little bit more flexibility to dive into a variety of issues. So we're working on legislative issues in all 50 states. We are working on federal issues at the U.S. level, ex-U.S., and so we're monitoring multiple things. I think if you were to be at a smaller company, you have to pick and choose your battles a little bit more. You might have to really focus on that one geographic area where you've got the biggest footprint. Whereas, we have the flexibility of doing a horizon scan globally and identifying particular policy risk and opportunities.
And so what would you say for those smaller shops? What would one low cost, sort of high impact government affairs tactic they would be able to steal from you? What would that be?
Yeah, develop a great tracking mechanism. And you don't have to buy a fancy software to do it if you have somebody in the house that can help develop a matrix, develop a spreadsheet of tracking, a database, but you don't want to miss things and then be late to the game with trying to respond to a government risk when it's already sort of past that point of no return. Often what happens is, a company will see, oh, there's this bill in X state and it's moving and I want to do something about it. Well, probably by that point, what could be done about it has already been done.
Right.
And so you want to have a team or maybe one person that is tracking the bills in the areas of focus for you, tracking the regs that may be problematic to your organization, and do it on a regular cadence. So if you develop that tracking mechanism, you'll be, I think, more successful.
Does that ever get to be a lot to handle, right? You're tracking bills in every state. I mean, it sounds like a brilliant way to deal with it, but it definitely sounds like it could become a lot to deal with.
Well, it can, but if you're a smaller company, what you have to do is narrow your focus. Like say, I'm only interested in data privacy bills in these 3 states where we have employees, and then that's how you direct your tracking. Mm-hmm. As opposed to a larger company, we have, contract lobbyists in a variety of states that are helping monitor things and engage directly.
And so we're in a climate of pretty chaotic regulatory changes, looking at tariffs.
Sure.
And so, I'm sure historically you'd like a playbook for crisis response type situations. Do you have something like this? And can you maybe walk us through what a real world scenario might look like for you?
Well, we do a lot of scenario planning. So whenever there's a new administration, for instance, I mean, we're thinking the US right now, but this is true in other governments where we have a major focus. We develop a team. We actually have an ongoing team that's involved in business continuity planning and strategic planning that sits down and thinks, okay, what are the potential things that could happen? And which ones do we need to have a proactive response to? And so before this new administration came in Washington, we sat down, like November, December, and did that scenario planning so that when January 20th came around, most of the things that have happened, we haven't been surprised about.
Wow.
Now, you don't necessarily know when a new tariff is going to be announced or when a new EO is going to come out. But generally speaking, okay, these are the type of executive orders we're going to see.
Yeah. And you can prepare for what seemed to be before something that would never have happened.
Because the biggest thing businesses don't want to have is surprises, right? And so to the extent that you can signal to your, you're a large company, you have business units, to your business unit presidents that, hey, you might be seeing an executive order in the next week or two on this thing. Here's what we've worked out about it.
So when working with leadership on this, how do you typically like to advance your narrative and in order to really get in there to protect them?
So one of the things that I like to talk about is building a policy literacy across the company, meaning you want to educate your leadership, even people who have no concept of government engagement at all, what to look for. Because my team can identify things, but it's also important that your business leaders can identify potential risk factors. So when we were dealing with the tariffs, for instance, in the early stages, one of our business units, our clinical labs business, had some specific niche concerns that we needed to address with, whether that's, Department of Commerce or Customs or what have you. I needed to know what those concerns were so that we could even go to the government agencies and make the request. Some of that can be generated from a government affairs or policy function, but a lot of it has to be generated from the people that have their hands in the business every day. And so if you spend the time on the outset educating them what to look for and what we need to hear, then it becomes a lot easier. So I think that's one of the important things that can be done.
So I know that some of the leadership can feel like this could be somewhat of a drain to their energy because you need to back your bottom line. Mm-hmm. How do you prove the value to that team?
It's a great question. Government affairs always sits at this weird spot because it can be located in a different number of areas depending on how your business is structured. I have been at companies where it's been located as it is now within legal, also when it's been located within the commercial part of the business. I was at one company where I reported to the chief medical officer. So it's, a range of different places you can find government affairs. And I think part of that is because companies see it differently. Some see it as a partner to help bring in business if you're in the government contract space. Some see it as a risk management, very legal focused entity. Some see it as a sort of commercial partner, almost similar to a marketing function that helps you communicate around issues, maybe closely aligned with communications. Some see it as a combination. I'm fortunate to be at a place now that understands the company-wide implications of government affairs. But one of the things I always try to tell my teams to do is figure out how to quantify your work. And that can be pretty difficult. And it's not just about, I had X number of meetings with members of Congress, because that can often be fairly pointless. But rather, are you helping in some way to bring in business? Now, it may be direct, this $10 million contract from a government agency that you facilitated, and then it's really easy. And other times it's more difficult. It could be something like, we prevented this regulation from moving through. It would have cost the business X, and so I've saved you that. Now, it's one thing to know that as a government affairs leader. It's another to figure out how to communicate that.
Sure.
So one of the things that I try to do is always communicate broadly when we have wins, to share how those wins are not just government wins, but business wins.
Right, and how it would have maybe possibly negatively affected the business and now hasn't.
Absolutely. Now we're in an environment in the U.S. in particular where it's a little bit easier because the interplay between government and business is becoming sort of front and center on the front page of most publications. And so I think you have a lot of CEOs that might not have been as interested in government affairs before that are now starting to become interested. But now's then the opportunity to take advantage of that and say, okay, it shouldn't just be in moments of government uncertainty where government affairs is a leading voice at the executive table. It should be always, because we never know what's going to change in the political environment. And you need to have a government affairs leader who is a policy advisor to your CEO and also to your board as well in these times of challenge.
It's true. And so speaking about the rest of the C-suite, you have your CFO, you've got chief compliance officers. How do you typically like to sync up individually with them?
Well, some of those individuals and I have a regular cadence, a regular conversation, with. It may be a weekly or a bi-weekly call. Others, it might be less frequent, So I talk pretty regularly with our CFO. Our chief human resources officer is not someone that I've typically talked with on a weekly basis, but now since there's so much interplay between government decisions that affect our employees, we've been communicating more. So, it's the likely individuals and some of the unlikely individuals. Investor relations, we have a frequent conversation now between government affairs and investor relations because analysts on Wall Street are asking questions about what's happening in the policy environment where that might not have been something top of mind, in previous years.
It sounds like an environment where you're constantly having to really pick new things up or just consider covering everything.
Well, you can't cover everything. And even if you're at a large company like I am with lots of employees and a sizable team, you can't.
Right.
You have to pick and choose. But you also have to be, if you're going to be a successful government affairs professional, really somewhat successful, you have to be willing to make changes. You have to be willing to adapt. It is not the type of position or career for somebody who likes to do the same thing every day, because that just doesn't work well.
Right.
Yeah.
So for somebody aspiring to become a government affairs professional or even a chief government affairs officer, what's the one skill or mindset they need to succeed at a company like yours?
There are certainly a number of them. I think one of the most important ones is a willingness to ask questions and not to be afraid to jump into conversations where you're not invited. Sometimes you have to invite yourself and communicate the importance of a government angle to something. If you're a sort of sit back, wait for people to come to you type of person, you might be successful at lobbying on the Hill, but you're not necessarily going to be successful at infusing policy into the course of your business. And so that's why I think, being willing to enter conversations proactively is so important.
Definitely. And for you, what is the most rewarding part of your role?
For me is when we can communicate a win into our business, and it's a win that actually has an impact, for us in healthcare on actual patients. So it's not something that's just amorphous, sort of up in the air. It's okay, we helped the FDA improve this regulation. It's going to speed up this clinical trial, or it's actually going to help, lower the cost of this medication to a particular set of patients because we have enabled CMS to do something more effectively.
When these tariffs come in, how do you avoid the frantic mess that can easily go along with it?
That's one of the most important questions. And here's why. I think particularly in times of uncertainty in politics and policy, you have leaders across your business who are concerned, to put it calmly, but freaked out in some cases. And they're reaching out to government affairs professionals and saying, oh, I saw this on CNN today, or I saw this on Fox last night. What does this mean? What's happening? And you spend, or you're sort of forced to spend a lot of time just responding to the incoming. If you train your team or your colleagues well, one of the things that you can do is avoid some of that, because you teach them what they should look for and when okay, now is a time to sit back. Your government affairs team is handling this. Here is when we should be concerned. Here is when we should weigh in. That's a part of the day-to-day that's a challenge that any good government affairs leader learns how to deal with. But I think it's also about having a clear strategy of the issues that matter to your business and sticking to those no matter what's going to hit you in a given month or a given day, right? If you feel like you need to respond to everything, you will not be able to move anything in terms of legislation or regulation, right? Because then most of your day becomes, okay, I got an email about this news article. I need to respond to it. Oh, I got a request about this thing somebody heard that's a rumor from FDA. I need to respond to it. But if you learn how to push those to the side and bracket them off for a little bit and stay committed to your core priorities, you'll be far more successful at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and you'll have things that you can come back to those same people with and say, I know you saw all of this sort of craziness in the news. Here's what we were focused on, and here's how we were successful for our business.
That's really fascinating. And I think overall, just hearing about what you're working on is very, very interesting. I think a lot of our followers will appreciate this and being able to dive into what a chief government affairs officer does. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was a privilege to have a chance to talk with you and talk about this really interesting role and important part of our companies.
Absolutely.